Hi and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the SAVE MORE study. I told you about SAVE, which was an open label trial of super-guided anakinra treatment in COVID-19, and we got these really nice results of 70% reduction treating patients with anakinra. But of course this was an open label trial, and you really have to do a randomized control trial, double-blinded, in order to be quite sure that the effect of the drug you see is not because maybe the physician thinks this patient needs the drug more than this patient. So the SAVE study resulted in a new study to follow up on the SAVE called SAVE MORE. And this randomized controlled double-blinded study, patients were randomized 2-to-1, 2-to-1 getting anakinra or placebo. And of course when it's double-blinded, meaning that the doctor do not know what the patient is being injected with and the patient do not know. So the main outcome was a reduction in disease severity, and we used the WHO 11-point scale, and it's a way you can say that if you have 10, you are died. If you have 0, then after 28 days, you have no symptoms, you have no positive RT-PCR of any coronavirus in your body, and if you have 7 to 9, then you are in the ICU, mechanically ventilated, or 9 having ECMO, and that way you can see that the higher you go on this scale, the more progressed the patient is. So our aim was to see if those who early having a super, so how did this study do the inclusion of patients? We had patients in the ED in 37 hospitals across Greece and Italy, and patients presenting in the ED with a super level above 6 nanograms per ml, indicating a dysregulated immune response, high level of chronic inflammation, high likelihood to develop hyperinflammation due to this dysregulated immune response. So these patients with high super, we already showed in our last videos, in our last papers, that COVID-19 patients with elevated super have significantly higher risk of developing severe respiratory failure and mortality. So we want to do something about this. Recognizing patients that have a high super may be an opportunity to intervene. Now this anakinra drug that we treated with is an IL-1 receptor blocker. So it inhibits the IL-1 receptor, which is a receptor for IL-1 beta and IL-1 alpha. So that's part of the early immune activation. If you have the virus, it will activate the toll-like receptors, the inflammasome, beautiful molecule, will produce the IL-1 beta, and this is common for all kinds of animals and so on. It's the innate immune response, it's very quick, and this will then downstream result in the activation and clonal expansion of cells and immune responses. So this is a very early trigger of inflammation. And what we say is that if you have a high super, your immune system will not respond well, so you need to block it, but you need to do this early in the disease progression. The day that the patient presents with an elevated super, this is your opportunity, because if you wait and the patient has progressed beyond this immune activation, but out here, it's too late to go back and block the IL-1 receptor. So we screened more than 1,000 patients, and we included around 600 patients in this double-blinded randomized controlled trial. So these patients who had super below 6, which was more than 400 patients, they were not included in the trial, and they actually had a very low risk of combined respiratory failure and mortality of only 2.9% during the study. So it was really good idea not to include patients with low super, because maybe if you have a good immune response and you block it, it might actually have a negative effect on the patient. If you have a good immune response, you have the immune system to help you. But if you have chronic, activated, inflamed immune system, you need to cut down using the anakinra drug. And what we saw was actually a really nice reduction in this scale. That generally we saw that those patients who received anakinra, they were much more likely to go this way on the scale or not to progress, while those who got the placebo, they had high risk of a negative outcome. So the odds ratio was 0.36, meaning that you had threefold less risk of severe disease progression if you got the anakinra and you got this early in the infection. So you can read this study was published in Nature Medicine in September, and it's fantastic results. And I think it's wonderful that we are getting more and more tools in the combat against the COVID-19 infection, or the SARS coronavirus infection and the COVID-19 disease. And this study was actually done on top of state-of-the-art. It was done on top of the corticosteroids and the remdesivir. So on top of that, they received the anakinra early in their disease progression in the ED if they had an elevated super, resulting in a much lower risk of progressing to more severe disease. Thank you for listening in.